Hello, I'm Thomas Hare, Chief Content Officer of the Performance Driven Marketing Institute, a not-for-profit trade association that serves companies in the performance and direct-to-consumer marketing world. Happy Wednesday to everybody, and welcome to the second event in our Summer 2022 seminar series. Today, created by the PDMI's E-Commerce Council, what the FTC updating its .com disclosures means for performance marketers. And boy, do I need to work on tightening up those titles. We welcome all of you to today's event, PDMI members and non-members alike. If you're not a PDMI member and are attending today, we'd love to have you consider joining the association. There's no better way to support the mission of the PDMI than joining and sharing your voice in the direction of the industry. In the handouts tab of your control panel, you'll find our latest membership brochure. I urge you to download it, flip through it, and contact any of our team members should you desire more information. Another housekeeping note, the group will be addressing any questions from the audience at the end of today's session. But you don't have to wait to ask them. You can utilize the questions tab on your control panel to type and send your question in. We'll be collecting them, and we'll try to get to as many as possible in the final moments of the webinar. Today's webinar focuses on the Federal Trade Commission and its early June announcement that it's looking at ways to update and modernize its .com disclosures, the Commission's guidance to businesses on digital advertising and marketing, first published 9 years ago. Performance and direct-to-consumer marketers have been buzzing about what these changes might look like, and the PDMI, with the assistance of its government affairs and e-commerce councils, submitted a public comment to the FTC on August 1st, sharing its thoughts on how the FTC should proceed in its efforts. Today, E-commerce Council Chairman Greg Silvano, CEO of Buyist, hosts this industry-wide roundtable of experts about what's next in the process, what marketers should be most concerned about, and their hopes for a balanced and thoughtful update to these important regulatory guidelines. I'd like to welcome the panel. Len Gordon, partner at Venable and a member of the PDMI Government Affairs Council. Daniel Kaufman, partner at Baker Hostetler and a member of the PDMI Government Affairs Council. And Damon Wright, partner at Gordon Rees LLP. Thanks to each of you for joining us. Greg, crew, take it away.
Thank you very much, Tom. All right, let's start with the basics. We'll go easy at the start here. The FTC is looking to update their .com disclosures guidelines. These are guidelines that were created in 2000. They were last updated in 2013. Does anybody want to give a quick overview of what's in those guidelines? Why anybody who's watching this would care about this topic at all? What's in them?
Sure, I can start. Thank you all for joining today. The guidelines, the .com disclosure guidelines, like other guidelines that the FTC has published, typically have been meant to be a guide for industry, for companies that want to try and follow the law, using some build out of FTC basic advertising principles and examples to help companies understand where the FTC is drawing the lines. Sometimes with, say, the green guides, those guidelines are the result of copy testing that the FTC does to understand how consumers interpret certain kinds of claims, whether disclaimers are effective, and whether what certain words consumers, how they interpret them, how they define them, whether they trigger certain actions by consumers.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
No, that's fair. I mean, that's in general with the guidelines the FTC issues are.
So in the current 2013 guidelines, they cover things like using understandable language, right? Saying that you can't use overly technical language to describe something, maybe a continuity program or something like that, when it could be used in a language that your audience would understand, or maybe the proximity and placement of terms, right? And whether or not things can be hidden behind a hyperlink and stuff like that. So and I think at the end of the day, the current ones, it comes down to, and there's a line from the current ones, is that they have to follow the same consumer protection laws that apply to offline media. Pretty simple, right? And they give lots of examples of how to do that. So here's a question. These are called guidelines. It's not called the law. So Daniel, do we have to care?
You are correct. So, but the purpose of guidelines, look, to me, the most important purpose of guidelines is to convey to industry where the line is drawn in terms of what's a law violation and what isn't. So that is the real purpose of a guideline. You don't go into court and say company violated the guidelines. You violate the FTC Act, And these guidelines are supposed to be telling you what does the FTC Act require. So the thing that I think has been quite good about the guidelines, the ones from 2000 and from 2013, they were really premised and described a lot of FTC cases. A lot of the principles and concepts you see there come from cases the FTC has brought, from court decisions on court. Exactly. So to me, that's what I think has been helpful about those guidelines. Again, there are things in there we can all quibble about, but I think at its core, it has been a statement of where the lines are drawn, and that is, certainly one of the concerns I have. And when we talk about a lot of the other things they're thinking, and we'll get to this, that they're thinking of including, the lines aren't really clear there at this point. So I am concerned about we're going to move away from some clarity to sort of a much fuzzier concept.
So looking back, hindsight being 2020, the current guidelines are pretty good. I mean, is that a safe assumption or a safe conclusion?
I have seen. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Damon.
No, I think they are. I think they embody, again, as you said, traditional advertising law principles. So advertising must be truthful and not misleading. You need to have a reasonable basis for any claim, and the advertiser, if they want to qualify a claim with the disclosure has to be clear and conspicuous. And that's really the focus of the .com guidelines. The idea being, we now have technology, the internet, smartphones. So how are you going to provide that clear and conspicuous disclosure on a smaller screen in a way a consumer is going to see? And I think the guidelines have worked very well. They're all, as Daniel and Len just said, they're basically the FTC's view of what will and will not violate Section 5 of the FTC Act, which prohibits unfair, deceptive advertising. And there could be some refinements and some improvements because technology has changed and things have here and there developed that perhaps the FTC should address. But they sort of in a fundamental core way, I think we all hope that they don't upset what is already out there. And it's a bit concerning that when they issued the press release announcing their intention to issue new guidelines, they said they want to update the guides to ensure the guides are helping businesses to treat consumers fairly. That's fine. Rather than being used as a shield by firms looking to deceive. And you read that and think, who is using these as a shield to deceive?
Yeah.
Well, I have a theory on that, which last May, the FTC lost its ability to use Section 13B of the FTC Act to get equitable monetary relief for violations of Section 5. So to get equitable monetary, or to get monetary relief, they've got to rely on Section 19. And they can use Section 19 for certain rule violations and certain statutory violations, such as the Store and Loan Shoppers Confidence Act, which deals with data passes and continuity marketing. But they also can use Section 19 in sort of a follow-on case to an administrative proceeding. So they would sue somebody in an administrative proceeding, and then after that proceeding is concluded, assumingly successfully for the FTC, they can go to federal court and use Section 19 and say, this conduct was such that a reasonable man should have known it was deceptive. And I suspect that one of the things that's driving the revisions of the .com disclosures is that they may try and use these to so we've warned companies this conduct is prohibited. It clearly violates the .com disclosures. That means a reasonable man should have known it was deceptive, and therefore we can get equitable monetary relief. The FTC is trying all kinds of things to repair the gaping hole that is in their suite of remedies, and I think this is one of those things.
And it's one of the newer ones, right?
Yeah.
So this is one of their first, not attempts, but I mean, that was just last year that happened, right? So, or 2 years ago.
And I think when you talk about the statement that Damon just mentioned, where they said, people are using the disclosures as a shield, this kind of a proceeding, a follow-on proceeding to an administrative action would be an area whether somebody could argue that they thought their conduct was in compliance with the guidelines, where that rubber might hit the road. So that's my sort of take on one of the reasons that might be driving this.
Okay, so they have the 2013 guidelines as they stand today. They're asking for comments to update the 2013 guidelines. And it's so 9 years later. It was 13 years the first time. It's 9 years this time. Is that in itself odd? Is the timing of this odd? Is there any part about that that's a little worrisome, just timing wise, or is that pretty standard operating procedure?
Timing-wise, we're standard. I hate to say this. I was at the FTC for the 2000 ones. I was at the FTC for the 2013 ones. I just left there about 10 months ago. But it is normal. Look, every 10 years or so is the standard time frame to review every rule. So this is very consistent with that. And there's been enormous changes since 2013. I mean, just the advent of TikTok and video being so much more pervasive and significant to how consumers consume content online now. So not worrisome at all in terms of the timing, worrisome in terms of what they're saying and who's in charge of the agency right now, and generally approaching consumer protection.
Yeah, so that's the perfect segue. So let's go through the first one of those, which is they don't just ask for comments. They actually outlined, a dozen or two things that they are considering. So I mean, we actually know what's on their mind right now. So if we go through some of these, let's just go through it at a very high level, then we'll dive into some of them deeper afterwards. But looking through their list of the bullet points that are in their request for comments, for example, number one, well, not number one, I'm gonna save one of the best ones for last, but item number 14 was, should the guidance document address issues that have arisen with virtual reality or the metaverse? And all of these I'm gonna edit a little bit just for time. So they're talking about advertising in the metaverse right now. Is that surprising?
It's not surprising. Makes sense. Look, the FTC always wants to be on the cutting edge of sort of looking at issues. What's worrisome is we don't know what the metaverse is going to look like yet. How are you going to tell us how to disclose things in the metaverse when it is still evolving? It's not ripe for guidelines. There's no baseline to go off of. The same principles will apply, proximity, prominence, all that. But having specific guidelines does not make sense in that context at this point.
Yeah, I agree. And although the FTC doesn't always fully appreciate this, I'm afraid, there are First Amendment principles in play. And commercial speech still is entitled to First Amendment protection. And if you are in a virtual reality metaverse realm, there is a blending of commercial speech and non-commercial speech as well. Non-commercial speech receives the highest amount of First Amendment protection. Commercial speech receives less. But what I'm concerned about is in that kind of free-flowing environment, especially, the FTC could come in and overreach and provide very rigid black and white guidance that they then would treat as force of law in court as much as they could, and it's not going to respect First Amendment speech rights.
So let's do this. Let's go through a few more of them. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to list some of them, and then we'll hit ones that maybe we'll pick one that worries you the most, and we'll dive into that. So just for the sake of, so people who maybe have not have read the request for comments who are watching this, they can get an understanding of what the FTC is thinking, at least what's on their mind. So they brought up things like space-constrained ads. So if there's not a Google ad, for example, would be a space-constrained ad. They talk about micro-targeted advertisements, which would be really any Facebook audience, right? It's if you buy a very small audience on Facebook, that would come into play. Using of hyperlinks for more information. And it goes to some things which guidance for established online sellers providing a platform for other firms to market and sell their products online. I mean, that's Amazon, that's any e-commerce platform. Those are pretty far-reaching things. And then last one I'll bring up, dark patterns, right? So they say what issues are raised by current or emerging online technologies, activities, or features, such as sponsored and promoting advertising on social media platforms, or, and this is all part of the same sentence, the use of advertising content embedded in games, or the use of dark pattern techniques in digital advertising. So if we're talking about potentially things that would impact, social media advertising, dark patterns, mobile devices, another thing they call out, they talk about using hyperlinks, they talk about micro audiences. What concerns you the most in this list? Anything come to mind?
At a high level, what concerns me the most is that typically when the FTC goes out for comment on guidelines, I think historically they've been trying to understand issues better, understand how consumers view certain types of advertising, how business works with this, why business uses these tools, and trying to draw a line, respecting the First Amendment, respecting, a desire not to be overly prescriptive. That's historically, I think, the way the FTC has approached these things. Daniel's been involved in rulemaking and guidelines, so he knows this and can correct me. But I think here the agency has a pretty clear idea what it wants to do, and I think it's looking for affirmation from certain consumer groups or public interest groups that affirm its position. And I really don't think this is sort of a really full effort to understand change and understand new tools. And so that sense that I've got is probably most concerning. I'd love to be able to be proven wrong, but that really is my concern, that they know what they want to do here, and this is sort of a show trial leading up to new guides that are much tougher and much more prescriptive, instead of sort of general principles with some examples, being much more prescriptive about what you can and can't do in advertising.
Damon, you concur?
With the 2000 .com guidelines, there were public workshops, and I think that would at least a 1 to 2 or 3 day public workshop to really get input about practical things would be wise here, and then also to have multiple comment periods once there are proposed guidelines, then getting comments on those, just to really dial it in or dial it back. So I hope the FTC, and some of the comments submitted, encourage the FTC to do that. So hopefully they'll consider that.
It's interesting, Damon. I was looking on the website, which is a train wreck right now. They redid the website. It's really hard to find things. As far as I can tell, for the 2003 guidelines, they had a few comment periods and a workshop. They didn't, as far as I can tell, put draft guidelines out for comment. They just released them. So I am concerned that if they do what they did then, we could just see guidelines come out. So that does concern me. One thing, I totally want to talk about dark patterns because it's my favorite topic, but actually the part of this that I think could most dramatically impact people is the hyperlink issue. Because I know with clients regularly, we're sort of evaluating advertisements, what information has to be sort of close to the claim because it's integral to the claim, and what information can be behind a hyperlink, a clearly labeled hyperlink. And the request for comment certainly makes it clear that they have a view that too much information is being put in the hyperlink, and they want to see more of that as part of the ad. So when you start to think about what that could mean for sort of individual websites or videos or anything, like that really has the potential to upset a very delicate balance. If they come out and say, we think all these other categories of information, we think, how the document, the product is made is integral to the claim. Like if there's all this stuff we've been comfortably putting behind hyperlinks that we now have to make part of the main claim, huge problem. So that's the thing that worries me the most, but I'm far more interested in dark patterns.
So we'll go to dark patterns in 1 second. It's also the one that I want to spend a lot of time on. But you touched on something that's really interesting. When I was reading through the comments, I was surprised when I think of this, I'm thinking of direct response, right? I'm thinking of direct to consumer campaigns. I'm thinking of people who are selling something on a website. And, if I think about FTC guidelines, I'm thinking, they're looking at supplements and claims and automatic enrollment and continuity, things like that. There was one of the longest responses, comments, was from the wireless carriers to this, right? And what I think that goes to show is, sometimes offers are very complicated. They're complex. There are lots of things involved in them. And if you have to disclose those at the advertisement level, this is not just at, only when you get to the website, it's actually at the advertisement level. That is very significant.
Yeah, I could imagine the FTC saying that anybody selling any product online where the terms of sale include limitations of liability and disclaimers of warranty and mandatory arbitration and class action waiver, all those need to be clear and conspicuous on the web page itself in a way that would perhaps
the average person can understand it.
Yeah, right. That the way your average person can understand. So perhaps it would be pro-consumer, but it also would be bombarding information overload to the consumer clutter up everything.
Right.
Where am I supposed to find this or that? Maybe the FTC would say, well, you need to put this in a box with this kind of size font in all capital letters and this and that. But then I think one of the comments talked about the Truth in Lending Act disclosures, and it originally was just supposed to be the finance charge, and now it's 20 odd different disclosures. Or your real estate closing, you're supposed to signal initial every single page, and it becomes overwhelming in a way that drives up the cost of compliance, and so it drives up the cost of goods for consumers, and it's overkill.
I mean, there's all societal issues here. I mean, one of the problems, and one of the things that we'll talk about probably more when we get to dark patterns, is people don't read. Okay, I've had this conversation with folks at the FTC, and I think the FTC views its mission as to some extent to protect people who don't read. But as you are working with marketers and you're saying, well, you've disclosed this quite clearly, that's great as long as somebody reads it. And so, part of what the .com disclosures are dealing with is how obvious do you have to make this? How much do you have to hit the consumer in the face with certain things? How much do they have to manifest their consent that they've read or understood things? Shrink wrap, click wrap, mortgage documents. People don't read those things, and most of the reason that those things are so Byzantine and dense is compliance with various laws. So there's a delicate balance here. I mean, consumers want more and more frictionless encounters online. They want speed. They want to get what they want as quick as they want, and they expect it at their house that day. And you take that consumer desire, that consumer motivation, which marketers are trying very hard to satisfy, and then you put a desire from the FTC to sort of slow down that process and to put speed bumps or delays or cooling off periods in that process, and having to read multiple things and check multiple boxes to complete a purchase. And there's a real fundamental tension there. I'm not sure it's the FTC's job to resolve that tension, and I'm not sure they're well equipped to do that. But I think they're trying to change that purchasing dynamic in some ways.
Let's pivot to dark patterns. It's fun. All right, Daniel, you grinned the most when the term dark patterns came out. So what's a high level description of a dark pattern? Which I'll repeat this. What they're saying here is what issues raised by current or emerging online technologies, activities or features such as the use of dark pattern techniques in digital advertising should be addressed in a revised guidance document. So Daniel,
at the highest level, advertising is a dark pattern because the definitions you see tend to be about user interfaces or interactions that are designed to manipulate consumers to make decisions they would not otherwise make, which is in many respects advertising. So, everything I see has, 20 different examples of what dark patterns can be, from the things that I think we would all agree are problematic in Section 5 violations to things that are good advertising. So it's this incredibly broad term. It's a hot term, so people are using it left and right.
Legal term?
It's generally no. On the federal level, it certainly isn't. We are seeing in some state privacy laws, they are starting to incorporate this dark pattern concept into how consent is obtained from consumers, and it can't be done in a way that's manipulating them to provide more information than they would. So state privacy laws are starting to use the language, or at least the definition. But there was actually federal legislation a couple years ago that went nowhere. I think it was called the Detour Act. So there is no clear definition as to what it is. And the definition I just gave you, that is too broad to be enforceable. Like if you prohibit dark patterns, you can't enforce that law.
So I have a list of 7 things here. We'll do a quiz. So I'll send one to each one of you. You let me know if this is a dark pattern based on your understanding of dark patterns today. And this is a list of things that most of us will have seen on a website at one point or another. So we'll start with Daniel. A countdown timer. Is that a dark pattern?
Unless it is a truly accurate countdown timer, whereas when it's done, people no longer can buy the product. It is a dark pattern. That is how it's interpreted.
Fake urgency, right? So you can't do that. That is not allowed. So we'll go to Damon next. Showing that there are only a few items left in inventory. Dark pattern?
yes, again, if it's not true, then would it be a dark pattern? Now you could say limited supplies because it is perhaps limited. They only have 50,000 units in stock. And I would be prepared to argue that, but if they say only 100 units left and they have 50,000 units in stock, no, that would be a dark pattern.
All right. Len, showing an offer and the yes button is more prominent than the no button.
So I don't think that's a dark pattern. I think the FTC might disagree, and I think it's also going to depend relative size. I mean, if you can't find the no button because it's so small or it's hidden behind text, you know, that's certainly much more of a dark pattern. And if you have double negatives or it's unclear whether you're actually what you're agreeing to, then that would be deceptive. I don't know. Dark pattern, I think, is a solution in search of a problem.
Okay. Damon, you're next. Having a decline button that says, no, I don't want to protect my family. Just go with yes. They're all dark patterns, man.
Yes. But you know, I in and of itself, I don't think that should be a violation of Section 5.
Yeah, so the popular term, and if you Google dark patterns, you'll find plenty of, not you, but audience, you'll find plenty of examples. That's actually where I took all of these. That particular one is called confirm shaming. So anything where you are really saying, no, I don't want to protect my family, you know, that I don't like saving money.
I want to save that. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Those are confirm shaming, considered a dark pattern. So next one is actually a pretty interesting one. And this could be borderline, but asking customers, so Daniel, asking customers the same question multiple times, like, are you sure?
So look, definitely a dark pattern from the definitions I see. Section 5 issue, I don't think so. But actually, before this call, I was looking on the I think it's the European Data Protection Board put forward a sort of 70-page document of their views of what dark patterns are. All of these are dark patterns there. You know, really, there's a focus on parity of choice that, again, if options are being presented in any way that differs, you know, certainly in Europe, they're viewing it as a dark pattern. We're not in Europe right now, but I do sometimes want to look over there and see sort of, is this the future for some of what we're doing, or are they just sort of on their own?
Interesting. All right, so here's my last one. And this is the one that, it's the only one that genuinely surprised me. If I give a success story of similar users, dark pattern. It is using social proof, which according to dark pattern is a dark pattern. You are overly influencing somebody that they will get similar results. Not just testimonials, not just before and afters, any sort of success story of similar users are in most people's lists of dark patterns, which strikes me as crazy.
Yeah, crazy, I think, is the right word. The hard thing, I think, as the FTC really starts pursuing this is, you know, they have to allege that these dark patterns are either deceptive, that is, that they would, you know, deceive a reasonable consumer, or they're unfair. They're causing consumer harm that the consumer couldn't reasonably avoid. And at a certain point, you know, courts are going to have to sort this out. And, you know, maybe the FTC will start using its administrative proceedings more and try and build some case law there. But, you know, I would think that if the FTC literally tries to pursue some of these things in federal district court, and you've got a judge who just got done a murder trial, and you've got the FTC counsel coming in saying, well, you know, these choices were presented equally, and they had success stories. Well, were they true? Yes. Well, you know, they're going to get their nose bloodied, and but I'm not sure the current commission cares that much about getting its nose bloodied, because I think that they want to drive the law to a certain place, and the ends justify the means.
Is there something that leads you to believe that, in the sense that they're looking to drive this to a particular place? Have they done this already, you know, in the last year or two, that gives a good indication? Have they said anything? I mean, is there something that makes us think we're not dealing with the FTC of 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago?
So look, big picture, there's a couple things I'd look at. First is just as soon as Chair Khan took over, there was a sort of, the agency stopped its effort to be a bipartisan agency. The FTC has always been at its best when it tries to get bipartisan solutions, and that's been just taken away completely. The Republican voices have been ignored, and they've not been getting information they should be getting earlier in her tenure. So we've seen a lot more sort of 3-2 decisions, getting rid of sort of policy statements at the start of her tenure that were, again, bipartisan policy statements that were withdrawn because they didn't go far enough with sort of her worldview. But I would also look at more recently the privacy rulemaking that the FTC kicked off a couple weeks ago. I mean, it is so broad. Again, we could talk all day about the privacy rulemaking, but there is a breadth to it that covers like every single privacy issue on the planet, ranging from sort of the impact of content on kids and teenagers to how you get consent to security to sort of racial justice issues. And you know, it's a really interesting rulemaking. It has, as far as I can tell, nothing to do with Section 5 of the FTC Act, which is what it's supposed to be about. But they have this breadth of worldview that seems to be sort of coming into everything. And one of those starting points is the collection of data for advertising purposes is bad and should be banned and prohibited. And that is an undercurrent of a lot of what we're seeing in you know, the endorsement guides reviews, in privacy reviews, and in .com. There is this, you always have to think about privacy in all these contexts because they're not looking at it solely about advertising. It's also about privacy and how you get consent from consumers to use their information and obtain their information.
Is the FTC, I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, to Daniel and Len's point, following up on what Len said at the beginning, after AMG Capital 9-0 lost, a lot of people thought the FTC will be humbled, more measured, more thoughtful, and instead it was proven to be just the opposite. We're not down, we're coming back with a vengeance, with fury. And so between a very unusual interpretation of ROSCA, that's always the Restore Online Shoppers Confidence Act, that's always been understood to apply to subscription billing, trying to turn that into an advertising law, to the notice of penalty violation letters that went out to a couple thousand businesses last fall.
And that was under ROSCA. That's how they.
No, it had to do with endorsement and testimonial guidelines, and then another set of letters had to do with earnings claims. And kind of to your hypothetical to Len, that if you are highlighting success stories, people who've made a lot of money building this kind of business, or a newsletter that has really good stock picks, that you are deceiving consumers unless you disclose what the typical experience is, what the average consumer has generated. But then there's more to it than that. But that kind of initiative, and even something as obvious as when Shere Khan took office, there was an announcement that at that point going forward, FTC employees were no longer allowed to participate and speak at any kind of industry conferences to business, because that's not a good use of our resources. We're here to protect consumers. You know, it's a bit of an anti-business, you're making money, you must be doing things wrong kind of perspective, unfortunately. I hope I'm wrong, but that's what has come across more and more. So that's the fear with, I think, going back to what we said before, with the new guidelines could be another example of that, even though there could be a need for some improvements and tweaks.
So Lena Khan is an acolyte, a disciple of Rohit Chopra at the CFPB. She worked for him, and I think she shares similar views. They clearly are coordinating things. He gave a speech at Wharton a couple of months ago that's actually frightening, I think, to read. I mean, he talks about when he was a student at Wharton, he assumed that most businessmen were crooked and that most government regulators were also crooked and just there to get themselves ready to make a lot of money helping crooked regulators, helping crooked businessmen. And that worldview, I think, is shared by Lena Khan, and it's shared by her actions. I mean, don't go out and talk to industry. I mean, essentially, it's that they don't need to know what industry thinks or what industry's concerns are, because they are so smart that they know better. And these people that they're talking to are ill-intentioned, and in some ways, it probably is reflective of discourse, throughout the country, where I think people attribute bad motives to anyone who disagrees with them. And I think rather than viewing some of these issues as hard issues that need thorough discussion and consideration of various views, I think anyone who disagrees with the current administration, I think, is perceived to be, evil.
Well,
So
it's interesting. It's reflected. You look at, I don't know if folks are following the employee satisfaction survey results that came out of the FTC. For decades, the FTC has been one of the highest rated agencies. People are very satisfied there, top 5 agency. Latest survey results, they plummeted. They became, I think, number 22 out of 24 of mid-size agency. I mean, it was shockingly awful results as soon as Chair Khan took over. So that's not good for an agency. If you want to accomplish things, you want to have the support of staff. And certainly the speech moratorium, I can tell you that did not go over well. I was there for that, to put it mildly. But there's the worldview, but there's also the treatment of professional staff. And you can have your disagreements with them and have different opinions, but you can't sort of ignore them. And there's a lot of ignoring going on.
And it's even worse on the antitrust side.
Oh, yeah.
And it carries through to how they evaluate advertising, in the sense that they say this is the net impression that a reasonable consumer will have when they view this.
Mm.
But that doesn't make it so. Their view of a reasonable consumer's net impression, if you actually did a consumer survey with a reliable survey expert who had the right methodology, could be totally different than what the actual net impression is. So, yeah.
I have something here. So this is something we didn't talk about this on our call this week, but I found it when I was doing some research yesterday, and it is a statement of the Commissioner Rohit Chopra in September 2nd, 2020. And this was part of ABC Mouse, I think, ABC Mouse case that they settled for, $10 million, somewhere along those. And the language in this is coming from him, it shocked me. So this is a genuine question. I'm going to read some of it. Is this par for the course, or is this kind of the new FTC, a new type of leadership here? And here are some sentences. Take me about less than a minute here. Dark patterns are design features used to deceive, steer, or manipulate users into behavior that is profitable for an online service, but often harmful to users or contrary to their intent. Dark patterns are the online successor to decades of dirty dealing in direct mail marketing. But because dark patterns are not limited to physical constraints and costs, their digital tricks and traps pose an even bigger menace than their paper precursors. Dark pattern tricks involve online sleight of hand, fake urgency, steer people away from certain choices. And then he brings up things like Uber has used ghost cars to give customers the false impression that they would need to wait a long time. He brings up dark patterns used by Microsoft, Google, Facebook that appear to trick users into sharing more of their personal data. And then here's some more lines. We've all been subjected to companies deploying dark patterns to dupe us. Looks like the Federal Trade Commission has numerous tools to root out these kind of tricks. He brings up ROSCA, Canned Spam Act, and then the FTC Act itself. But here's how it ends. If the Federal Trade Commission aspires to be a credible watchdog of digital markets, the agency must deploy these tools to go after large firms that make millions or even billions through tricking or trapping users through dark patterns. We cannot replicate the whack-a-mole strategy that we have pursued on pressing issues like fake reviews, digital disinformation, and data protection. Instead, we need to methodically use all of our tools to shine a light on the unlawful digital dark patterns, and we need to contain the spread of this popular, profitable, and problematic business practice. He's angry there.
It sounds a little bit toned down from some of the versions of it before they left the building. I gotta tell you.
Really?
Yeah, look, I mean, he manages to both attack the agency, attack industry, attack staff, and but we are seeing this is part of the worldview. So look, from my perspective, this is what we're starting to see. I do think there are some reasonable minds at the FTC that are like, wait, this is not quite the direction we need to be heading, but unfortunately they're not in the majority right now. But no, look, those are his words. He put out that statement, and those are his beliefs. And I think there are people that share those beliefs as well.
So Len, you had said in passing when we talked earlier, you said terror and uncertainty are enforcement tools. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, is this part of that? Is it just could this be shot across the bow? And
so, I don't know exactly where the line is between how much of this is an effort by he and Khan to scare business into changing their behavior, and then actually acting more reasonably. I haven't seen the second part of that yet. Maybe it's coming. Who knows? But I do think they view creating uncertainty about where the lines are drawn and using really strong rhetoric to try and scare businesses into behaving in ways that they want, even if the ways the businesses were behaving weren't necessarily illegal. They're trying to just sort of change the way certain. You read that statement you just read. It sounds like salesmanship is now illegal. Like when you're talking to someone who's trying to convince you to buy something, whether it's a computer program or a car or a carpet there's a long way between deception and good salesmanship. But those remarks sort of erase that line and shrink, I think, and at least in his mind, the large distance between those two. So I do think some of the rhetoric is to try and scare people, but I think a lot of their focus is on the big platforms. The CFPB has sent all kinds of information requests to the big platforms. The FTC is engaged in all kinds of antitrust litigation and consumer investigations against the big platforms, and a lot of that is focused on the amassing and then use of data to target advertising, and they think that is evil. I mean, they really do. I mean, I think they think using artificial intelligence and sophisticated tools to target advertising and to charge people for that is evil. And I think the other side of the argument thinks, well, that's what gives you free content on the internet. And again, these are societal issues, I think, more than law enforcement issues, but they're treating them as law enforcement issues and using some really strong rhetoric.
Looping back to the request for comments, just in general, the PDMI issued some comments, and the gist of it was the current guidelines are good. Don't make any big changes. Dark patterns don't have any real case law behind them yet, so don't include those. Do you agree? Is the current guideline pretty good? Doesn't require sweeping changes? Damon, actually, I'll go to you. You've been quiet for a little while.
I do agree. I do. I think one area where there is room for improvement could be in the area of the resellers on Amazon. And that's a minor fix or update, but that resellers should be required to conspicuously disclose if they're not the authorized manufacturer or authorized reseller. It can be sometimes a trademark infringement issue for the brand owner, but there's also something called the first sale doctrine that might protect the reseller from a trademark claim. And I think it'd be good for consumers to know if they're buying from the genuine source or buying from a reseller. And there's some other things that I think could tweaks that can be made. They're minor.
You can keep going. We got time.
I mean, Dan and Len, what do you like?
What I thought would have made sense would have been, instead of redoing the guidelines, perhaps to issue some more examples. I think the examples are the things that are the most useful to me and to the companies that we advise, because you can show them, the FTC says you can't do it this way, but you can do it this way. It's concrete and it resonates more than what I think we're going to end up with the new guidelines, which are going to be very prescriptive and things that, these are supposed to be business tools, and I don't think they're going to be business. If they're so hostile to business, I don't think they're going to be helpful, and businesses don't want to do things the right way. I mean, I think part of the problem is that the agency, at least the current leadership agency, thinks some of these things are really easy to decide, and they're not. They're gray, they're hard questions, and they're subtle questions, and it's not nearly as right as the FTC would like to make it think.
If they go too broad here, what happens? Is it this tool that we all must fear, or does it become useless? Does it become academic? What's the outcome of them? Let's say they get exactly what they want. What happens? What happens to us?
It becomes a little bit of both. It becomes far less useful and something that we also do have to fear. Because even if the utility is gone, again, if they're sort of raising issues that we don't think violate Section 5 and putting things on that side of the law that shouldn't be. But that said, if there's a company that decides to challenge it and get sued and go to court, the FTC will point to the guidelines and say, look, we know this we're not saying he violated the guidelines, but the guidelines said X and he did Y. And therefore, he was on notice that this is a violation. And again, that doesn't necessarily change things, but if a judge is not inclined in your direction, it certainly is going to push the judge further away from you. So it is a tool that will be used in court. Again, you violate the FTC Act, not guidelines, and it's sort of ignored at your own peril.
Daniel, you'll agree that for personal liability, there's a personal liability. There's more of a knowledge component, and it's not quite as big a deal now with 13B. But I think they'll use it to try and tag more and more executives saying, you were aware of the guidelines and you didn't act in accordance with them, and so.
Yeah, there was a big district court decision in the Fleet Corp case where the CEO was found liable in district court. And you don't see that very often for a publicly traded company. So definitely agree with you, Len.
They're asking for comments. I'm sorry, Damon, do you have something?
I was going to say, so Greg, just to follow up on that, if they are very, very broad and very, very prescriptive, every business selling products or services to consumers will need to be that much more scared. And it's going to be a there but for the grace of God go I kind of situation. Mm-hmm. What happens so often is, I know Daniel and Lana, we've all had clients where they have an A+ BBB rating, they have very few complaints, they have in-house counsel, they want to do things the right way, and the FTC sends a civil investigative demand that is incredibly overbroad. There's no real symmetry in this context like you'd have in regular civil litigation with two businesses suing each other. It's very one-sided. And so massively overbroad civil investigative demand. And so often the response by the lawyer for the company is, we'd like to know what it is in particular that you have concerns with so we can get it fixed right away. This is a company that wants to do things the right way. Please let us know. How would you like for us to change this or that? Where is the concern? And unfortunately, too often the response back from the FTC counsel staff is, produce everything we've asked for, we'll review it, and then we'll get back to you. Well, that's a monumental exercise, several hundreds of thousands of dollars, huge distraction and disruption for the company. And by the time all of that is produced to the FTC and they've started to analyze and digest it, and then they kind of reach the conclusion about here it is that we're concerned about, well, at that point, they've put in so much work and effort that they need to have something to show for all that. So regardless of the company's willingness to do right at the outset and in good faith and cooperation, the FTC says we want tens of millions of dollars, and here's the injunction that you need to agree to, or else we're going to sue. But it's something that could have been nipped in the bud very early, is my point. And so that kind of scenario is, I think, would become more and more frequent and scarier if the FTC continues further down this path.
Which I think goes to Len's comment about examples, right? So if you look at the current 2013 disclosures, it's a 21-page document of text and then 26 pages of examples, screenshots, and real mock-ups of exactly what is allowed and what would not be allowed, right? So you can actually see it. I get that. Okay, so just for sake of time, I know we're going to be wrapping up soon. I have a couple other questions. Are they going to be influenced by comments?
So, look, I will say they are most influenced by research. When comments are providing independent research analysis, that is the stuff that's the most influential. Look, I skimmed through the comments online. It looked like these sort of expected lines were drawn. Parties you would expect saying, focus on dark patterns, industry is bad, to people saying it's fine. So the comments I looked at didn't really dramatically change things, so I didn't see anything there that looked like new and interesting research. They will review the comments, they look at them closely, but we also have FTC leadership has no problem right now with sort of going against staff's recommendation. We know the big merger they filed 3 weeks ago, reporting has indicated that that was over staff's objections. So even though staff will dig in, look at the comments and look at both sides, it's the leadership that I'm worried about.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that bothers me about this process and is, as Daniel mentioned, it's become more of a political agency. And if guidelines go out that are, the views of the chairman and a few select people there, and then, a new administration comes in and there's new guidance, you start getting this, the guidance changes and enforcement approaches change every administration, which has not been how the FTC historically has acted, especially on the consumer protection side. And that makes it really hard for businesses who want to do things the right way. Changing these things isn't easy. There's a lot of ad copy out there. There's a lot of funnels out there, and it's not like you can just go like this and everything's better and still converts. I mean, these companies are still for-profit entities. They have employees they need to pay. They have suppliers they need to pay. They have shareholders who expect returns on their investment. And if policy and guidance changes that rapidly with changes in administration, it becomes very, very expensive and very inefficient. So that is something that worries me as the agency becomes more political.
All right, so in 30 seconds or less, just so we can get it back to Tom, in case there were questions, what's the next step in this? How long does this process typically last?
At least a year. Look, hopefully they're going to do some sort of workshop on this that raises important issues. If they were just to go out with revised guides, that would, I think, be a disaster. So hopefully at some point they'll announce a workshop to analyze some of these issues, but I would anticipate a year or so.
Got it.
Agreed.
Gentlemen, thank you. Tom, back to you.
Thank you guys for the conversation. We do have 3 questions that we're going to try to get to, and I'm just going to throw them out. There's no one specific directed at anybody specifically. The first one that came in, if there's a change in the congressional power structure after the midterms, how do you think that will affect the FTC's aggressiveness on this in the next year or 2?
There's going to be a lot of ugly hearings if there's a change in power on Capitol Hill. So I do think that will have an impact. I don't know how much though. I mean, certainly if it's both houses, enormous impact. Less so if it's one house versus the other, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, the Congress controls the FTC's budget, and if there's enough anger, better word than angst, on the Hill about what the FTC is doing right and how it's doing it, that can affect the agency's budget. And as you would expect the chair to react to that. If she's just getting yelled at, I don't think that's going to change the way she's behaving. I think she thinks she's right and everybody else is wrong, and I'm not sure anything somebody on the Hill says is really going to change that.
I agree.
Great. We get this question a lot. If you could advise marketers and brands on one thing when it comes to the proposed disclosures, the changes, upcoming changes, what would your words of wisdom be today?
Well, pay attention to your complaints. I mean, but it is a dot-com disclosure rule, because what the agencies are going to do is say, well, you've got a lot of complaints. You must, that is itself evidence that you're using dark patterns because people are being manipulated in some way. So you've got to go back to basics and listen to what your customers are saying, and then also continue to be involved through PDMI and others. I mean, the industry here needs a voice, so continue to be involved and listen to your customers and talk to your congressman.
Yeah, those are the better 2 answers there. One more would be very specific. Stop using the word disclaimer in the footer. For a long time, we've had the word disclaimer, and then sometimes fine print or gray on black. Change the word disclaimer to disclosure. Make the text larger. Make sure it's white against black or it jumps out from the page. And then, because the disclosure is supposed to be in close proximity to the claim, you don't want to take that whole section at the bottom of the web page and drop it in the middle of your ad copy. But when you make the claim in the ad copy, go ahead and put, not just as asterisks, but put in parentheses right after the claim, for more information, see important disclosure below, close parentheses. So you have an argument that you've told the consumer, here's where you go to learn more about this in the flow of the ad copy. Just again, not trying to disrupt the flow, but wanting to make sure we have that argument that we're pointing the consumer to where they can find it.
I like that.
And, no, those are all great advice. The thing I would add also is, less is often more. Lots and lots of text is really not your friend. So if there are ways to streamline the concepts, making the same points with less words, it's going to be more readable, and also actually look better as well.
Great. Great. Last one. You guys talked a lot about the kind of the negative atmosphere that's pervasive inside the commission right now. Will that affect, or how will it affect how aggressively the day-to-day staff enforces any of the directives coming down from above? Well, is there mutiny, I guess, is the question.
No.
So look, staff at the FTC will do what the chair requests them to do. They will do it, and they will do it well, as long as it's not something that violates the law or unethical or something like that. So staff will do her agenda and sort of follow up and litigate the cases that they're told to litigate. That said, how do you motivate staff if they're litigating a case where they think that the settlement that was on the table is better than what a judge is going to give them? So it's a really problematic leadership issue. If you're bringing cases that everybody knows are not going to be successful because you want to make a point, if you're a staff stuck on those cases, that really sucks, because it's not what you want to be doing with your time. You don't feel like you're helping consumers. So to me, it's a real leadership challenge. But staff will, they're not going to mutiny, but lots of leaks from the building. There's been lots of leaks about stuff that's going on. So that may be an element of what's going on, but actually I don't think staff is behind the leaks. I don't think they do that generally.
I think that was a great answer. I can't add to that.
Well, let me rejoin you real quick here. Gentlemen, thank you. Greg, great job as always. I love the dark patterns game. So thank you for taking the lead on this as our moderator. Daniel, Damon, Len, appreciate you all being here. We are just about out of time. We want to say thank you to all of you for joining us. And thank you to the E-Commerce Council for creating the event today. If you're a PDMI member and would like to get involved, you can reach out to me directly to share your interest in the E-Commerce Council or any of our other 4 councils today. Your next opportunity to attend a PDMI event live online is the next edition of Take 20, our bi-monthly 20-minute webinar series created by the PDMI's Brand Response Council. That event is set for next Wednesday, August 31st at 2 o'clock Eastern and 11 a.m. Pacific, and is part of a 2-part series on the topic of data privacy. For more information and to register for the webinar, please visit thepdmi.com/take-20. In addition, you can register and book your hotel room now for PDMI West, our next live and in-person 3-day event set for October 24th to 26th at Hard Rock Hotel San Diego. Visit thepdmi.com/pdmi-west to register today. Thank you again for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your work week. Be well. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.